Hi there, and welcome to the Surviving Trauma Stories of Hope podcast. In today's episode, I am thrilled to welcome the incredible leader in the field of psychology, leadership, and HRV, Matthew Bennett, to the podcast. Matt has a master's degree in psychology and a master's degree in business administration. He successfully combines his academic pursuits as a researcher, blogger, and podcast on the Heart Rate Variability Podcast, Trauma-Informed Lens Podcast, and published author of articles and books. Matt has written 5 books. His books include Heart Rate Variability, The Future of Trauma-Informed Care, The Heartbeat of Business, Connecting Paradigms, a trauma-informed and neurobiological framework for motivational interviewing implementation, Talking about trauma and change, and trauma-sensitive early education. Matt is a popular speaker on mental health, workforce resiliency, leadership, and trauma. It has been wonderful to have Matt join me on the podcast, and my listeners, this is an episode not to be missed. Thank you to all of you for joining me on this journey. Comment on the posts on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn, and let me know what you think of this episode. Also, head to Amazon.com or takealot.com and get your copy of my book, Ray of Light. And please leave me a rating and review. It would mean the world to me. Please click on my website and download your free journal prompt and relaxing meditation on the resources page. As always, stay tuned and keep listening. Hi, Matt. Welcome. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Really honored to be on the show today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me. I love it. So I'm going to just dive straight in. You have a master's degree in psychology and business administration. Congratulations. I know how difficult it is just to get one degree, but Matt, you've really done it in the field of business and psychology. What an awesome achievement.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I know that as a young student, you learned about ACE's studies in the early 2000s, right? Which was really life-changing for you. And I mean, it sort of informed part of the work that you've been doing over the last 20 years. Do you want to just expand a bit and tell the listeners sort of what ACI studies is and how do we apply it?
Absolutely. So as a young therapist, I was doing a lot of work with highly traumatized youth. So coming out of really horrific violence, abuse, and really at the time in the late 90s when I was in graduate school, I never felt like I had a really good understanding of why certain people struggled. Like why were the youth I was working with, which I love their energy. I loved just working with them, but I also saw them in these pipelines to prison and poverty and homelessness and just what was going on. And I could see this generationally with their families. And even with basically, as I like to say, my graduate degrees are basically now my student loan debt that I'll be paying off forever, is that I just did not have a great, scientific foundation. And then the adverse childhood experience study came out of San Diego, California. It was conducted in the mid-90s, but it really started for most of us to hit our consciousness, if we were lucky, in the early 2000s. And I started to learn, if your listeners aren't familiar with this, it was a health, Kaiser Permanente, which was a large healthcare insurance company. And they were actually doing some studies around healthy eating. And they saw people were dropping out of these studies after being successful. And when they started to interview these folks, they started to talk about as they sort of lost weight, people started to pay attention to them in romantic ways that brought back memories of their past sexual abuse. And, these mostly medical professionals at the time were like, what the heck is going on here? Why would something that happened 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago have any impact on things like diabetes or healthy weight or eating? And so they partnered with the Centers for Disease Control here in the States to run 17,000 people through. And it really, as I like to say, it kicked the door down, because what we saw was trauma was much more prevalent than we ever assumed it was. It wasn't just something that happened on that side of town or in this community. It was really prevalent everywhere. And it really started to connect because they had the health records of these individuals, you could see things like higher rates of diabetes, cancer, a range of chronic and terminal diseases, a range of social problems like incarceration, unemployment, poverty, social problems like divorce, intimate partner violence. So all of a sudden, it just really broke this door down. And then they started to integrate the neurobiology into it so we could start to see the people with untreated. That's a really key thing, because as your podcast does a great job of doing, there is hope of healing for everybody. But untreated trauma left really biological wounds that resulted in social, emotional, cognitive struggles. And ultimately, and what really sparked my passion back in 2002, 2003, when I saw it, is that people with what we call complex trauma, so a life of trauma, it threatens to take 20 years off their life. So we have a condition that's treatable, that in many ways you could say is curable, but if we don't get people the help that they need, it could threaten to take 20 years off their life. So at that point, I was like, everybody needs to hear about this. And that sent me on a 20 plus year journey that has been a spectacular journey to help people understand this, learn about this, apply it, integrate it into different aspects of mental health, public health, social services, and other areas in our society.
Right. If I understand you correctly, this was a direct link that was made between disease and unhealed trauma.
Right. Disease, mental health, social problems, yes.
Yeah. How did this work sort of inform what you do in the training today? Because you talk about trauma-informed environments, sort of like your communities, like in business, like in the homes. So tell us more about the work that you do that is trauma-informed, focused on staff resiliency and more trauma-informed leadership.
Awesome. So one is obviously understanding, because a lot of folks I work with in the healthcare, mental health, social service arena are directly working with, folks with complex trauma coming in with that history. So really, a lot of my work initially was educating folks on the impact of trauma, on behaviors, on health, on relationships, and really helping them to start to understand the why behind a lot of the behavioral struggles and other issues that we see. Also really talking about the importance of really connecting people that have been impacted by trauma to not only resources and support, but also trauma treatment. We live in a time where psychology has just had this huge paradigm shift with the trauma work, where there's just a vast numbers of ways to heal from everything from trauma-informed yoga, trauma-informed Pilates, to a range of trauma-informed mental health approaches. The other side of that too is one of the things I really realized, and this is where my MBA comes in, is that in order to help people heal, the folks doing the helping, the healing, have to be healthy themselves. And we know people, at least here in the States, in healthcare, social services, mental health, also our educators who play such an important role, are often the most burned out people in our society. So, one of my big focuses as well was to combine my expertise, both on the clinical side, but also the business side, to really look at, how do we keep ourselves healthy in this work? Because being exposed to people's trauma can create a trauma response in ourselves. And also, how do we create healthy organizations, healthy teams? So when folks come in who are struggling, they're surrounded by people who have the health, the energy, the motivation to really help them thrive. So, whether my training is for how do we really help the folks who come to us for services, but also how do we help ourselves stay healthy in the context as well? Because a burned out system, burned out individuals probably don't have the energy to really maximize the opportunity we have to help people live better lives. So that's a lot of my training kind of evolves around that. I also, wrote a book. My first book was on trauma-informed motivational interviewing. So how do we help people with trauma find motivation to create to do really difficult life changes. So it's kind of fun. As I like to joke, I'm sort of on this trauma-informed paradigm wave, and it sort of just dumps me where it wants me. So I get to wake up every day and kind of see what the world might need me to do. And it's been a great and amazing journey, which connects me to wonderful people like yourself, and just getting to know your podcast over the last few days. I'm always learning. I'm always growing, thanks to folks like you as well.
Thank you. So it sounds like you basically deal in your business with the training and working trauma informed with individuals as well as with groups. So what would the focus of those group sessions be?
Yeah, so it's my work kind of right now is in kind of two boxes, you could think. One is just trainings. I do a lot of trainings. Pre-pandemic, I spent a lot of time on airplanes. Now I spend a lot of time on this camera. Not nearly as fun as having a room full of people. So really just the educational part of this. Now with the trauma-informed care specifically, when Oprah writes a book on your topic, the word is out, and Vanderkalt and Mate, like all these great, what you do is, so a lot of people know this. So one of the other pillars of kind of boxes of what I do is how do you apply this? How do you take this information and structure programming or structure HR, human resources around these principles? So my work is transitioning kind of more and more into the quality improvement, working with communities, working with organizations to help integrate these principles. As I like to say, really integrating trauma-informed principles into their DNA. So how they look at services they deliver, how they look at how they treat staff. That's really the next part of this challenge, or one of them at least, is how do you integrate this, like I said, into your DNA? So trauma-informed is how you operate. It's not a separate component, but really what we do. So, we're now kind of in from the educational stage into the implementation, practical stage of this paradigm, which a lot of us have been doing a mixture of that for a few decades now. But the practical implementation side is exciting, that we're really strongly there in a lot of ways.
So, Matt, you recently utilized all of this vast knowledge that you've just shared with us and, your knowledge on resilience and trauma to found Optimal HRV, which is Heart Rate Variability. Now, I know that Optimal HRV, is an app that provides a way to quantitatively measure the HRV. So what does that mean, and how does that help me if I am a trauma survivor?
Awesome. Great question. So as a therapist, so I you gave me a great runway for my journey. And I talked about when I saw the adverse childhood experience study, really that the co-paradigm shift that was happening was around the neurobiology. So we saw how, we could see that folks, again, with that complex trauma, prefrontal cortexes were actually physically smaller in size. Amygdala, the anxiety parts of our brain, physically larger in size, memory centers physically smaller. So I was learning all this amazing science about really, like I like to say, the wound left over by untreated trauma. Again, I want every listener to know that due to the plasticity of the brain, this can heal through treatment. So there's so much hope here. But if before treatment happens, there's this wound left over. And I sort of felt, especially as a therapist, I sort of felt like a doctor where you would come in and let's say somebody ran into you with a car and you say, "Doc, my leg really hurts." And, my clinical expertise, I could probably say, your leg is broke. But as a clinician, again, I knew there was a biological injury left over by trauma, but I didn't have an x-ray to see the extent of the injury, which bothered me a little bit. But if you think about that doctor, if you broke your leg, they would want to have a CT scan or an x-ray to make sure their intervention was helping you heal. And I always felt I had all this science, but I didn't have a way to say, was my intervention, let's say you were my client, what was my therapy helping you heal? Like, yeah, you might feel better. There might be some things there, but was I helping to underline that neurobiology? So about 6 years ago, I came across heart rate variability. And I can go into a little bit of detail, and I'll check in to make sure I'm hitting this, because when you think about it all the time, sometimes you go over people's head. But basically, what we see with heart rate variability, the real definition that got me excited, it's the ability to handle or recover from stress or trauma. So again, we know that trauma really dysregulates the nervous system. So if I can get a little technical, what we see with a lot of people, we have something called the sympathetic nervous system, often known as the fight or flight response. And for folks with untreated trauma, a lot of times that sympathetic system is overactive. So we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder being an anxiety disorder. So we actually see it. I'm pointing in my mid-chest because that's where it's located. We also have this really cool a parasympathetic nervous system that really, in many ways, sits on top of this sympathetic and puts a brake on it. So when we talk about heart rate variability, what we see is this interaction between the sympathetic response, but really the strength of the calming part of our nervous system to calm down that sympathetic. So what we know, a lot of people think that the heart rate's kind of like a metronome that keeps a steady beat. And that's actually not true. Is that when we have really good emotional regulation, cognitive engagement, the ability to connect socially, we have that strong parasympathetic brake on that sympathetic activation. So every time we inhale, we actually see that the heart rate goes up. And if we're emotionally regulating that prefrontal cortex, every time we exhale, we see the heart rate go pretty significantly down for milliseconds, but we see this variation in heart rate. So the more variation we have, the healthier and the more regulated our nervous system is. So with folks with trauma, what we see is lower heart rate variability at intake into therapy, into services. And over time, so your great question of what's this mean to me as a trauma survivor is the treatment you're getting, maybe the lifestyle changes or whatever you're doing to live a healthier life, is it really helping to heal this underlying wound left over by trauma? And with heart rate variability, we can give you a number. We can give you want to see your weekly average start to creep up over time. We want to see monthly average start to go up over time. And so there's this great science for me to put a number on something, to show it really in a concrete scientific way. Just I can say, hey, I changed my nutritional intake. I changed my exercise routine. Is that impacting my overall health and wellness in a positive way? And so, the parts, again, that we see can be damaged by trauma, we can actually measure that journey to post-traumatic growth now, which, again, as that doctor who kind of felt like, hey, I think your leg is broken and I think what I'm doing is working, now I can really get some data on how severely the trauma has impacted your nervous system, and I can start to measure your progress and make sure that the intervention that I'm giving you or the interventions that you're doing for yourself are really helping facilitate that post-traumatic growth experience.
Right. Even though this is an app, it is a evidence-based intervention.
Absolutely.
Because you have the actual data.
Yeah, it's been around.
That shows that progress.
Yeah. So the exciting thing is heart rate variability has been around since the 1960s. Why a lot of people haven't heard about it is because you had to go to a laboratory to get it done. And just in recent years, a under $50 monitor and a smartphone app can get you as accurate of data as you used to have to go into a laboratory to get. So something that was really in the academic world due to Bluetooth technology and smartphone technology, now is available pretty much to everybody. And, my goal with Optimal HRV was to really look at this from a trauma-informed perspective, to make sure that the information was more directed towards the mental health aspect of this, because it was an area that was sort of being ignored out there, because elite athletes love heart rate variability because it measures physical stress on the nervous system, as well as mental health. But, when I started this off, nobody was thinking about this with individuals, experiencing trauma. So we really set out to say, hey, we want to help folks who are recovering from trauma to really have access to this science as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, severe anxiety, and that obviously will leave a physical impact on the body, such as, chemical imbalances of the brain, obviously a direct impact on the nervous system. So, what are the benefits of using this application?
Yep. So on one hand, we can measure progress. So that is the answer is, like I said, if you go into therapy and you're doing the hard work, the brave work to heal from trauma, you should see improvements, lower anxiety, higher heart rate variability. So to measure it. Now, the second piece of our app, which I'm really excited about, because we've been kind of working really hard on getting this out, is mindfulness and biofeedback. So the other part of the heart rate variability science is that we each have, I have what's called a resonance frequency breathing rate. Fancy term to say you have a breathing rate somewhere between 4 breaths and 7 breaths a minute, which really helps. We talk about that parasympathetic kind of break to really open up emotional regulation, cognitive engagement, calm anxiety, really help people address depression, those sort of things. Is that you have an ideal rate, I have an ideal rate. So the other thing our app does is that it helps identify what is your ideal breathing rate. So mine is 4 breaths a minute. I know, again, at 4.5, 5.5, there's different ones for different people. So we using the heart rate variability science helps you identify your ideal breathing rate. And then you can just breathe at that rate with a pacer. So you can just, do it. If you got, like, I love Tai Chi, so I do my RF breathing rate during my Tai Chi practice in the morning. But we also have a range of mindfulness and self-compassion activity. So we help you breathe at that rate and then give you feedback during the activity to show how your breathing is helping to really optimize that healing, that calming part of your nervous system. So for a lot of trauma survivors, anxiety, that sort of, maybe it's a low grade, but that is kind of always there with them a lot of times. Other times it manifests as depression. So really helping them to find that calm place. We'll initially work to find that in your mindfulness or self-compassion practice. And then hopefully that can grow into other aspects of your life. So we're building a coping skill. We're also I like to think mindfulness, there's great research about how mindfulness can help heal from trauma. Mindfulness at RF frequency breathing rate is like going to put mindfulness on steroids. It really maximizes the benefit and the time investment in the mindfulness as a healing part of your trauma journey.
Wow. And I assume in the application, there are prompts that will prompt you to, take certain actions.
Yep, absolutely. So we've got reminders in there. We got videos, because the cool thing about heart rate variability for me as a mental health person and as somebody who's focused on trauma treatment, talk therapy, that's the tool that I have. Yes. And so one of the things that I think is really fascinating though now, and I think is really important for so many trauma survivors out there and folks really healing from their trauma, is there's other things that can improve heart rate variability. So when we look at heart rate variability as a sign of a regulated nervous system, now I talk about movement, sleep quality, nutrition, because we know, to me, those are the foundation. So as a therapist, if I don't talk to you about getting 8 hours of healthy sleep a night, if we don't talk about your nutrition, because there's foods that activate the sympathetic, they're called inflammatory foods that activate the sympathetic response. Others actually help activate the parasympathetic response. Mm-hmm. And again, movement or exercise, what I say is I set a ceiling on how much I can help you. So I can still do a lot of work, but if I don't talk to you about those fundamentals of resiliency, there's going to be a ceiling about how much I can help you. So it also brings in things. Another one, interesting one, is gargling. Like, why would
What?
I, why I do it?
Gargling?
Yeah, gargling. And if you put a little salt in your gargle, it's better than mouthwash for you. I learned that. Warm, but gargling activates what's called the vagus nerve, which is key to that parasympathetic nervous system I've been talking about. So
Yes.
gargling will activate that nerve and improve heart rate variability. Singing in the shower, a great, so that vocal, and I know listening to your podcast, the spiritual aspect of it, but the amen, the om, that
Yes.
where you can feel right here, that's your vagus nerve. And we actually have scientific evidence. This isn't Matt just being crazy because he likes to om it out. There's scientific evidence that
Yes.
helps activate that calming part of your nervous system. So all of a sudden we've got all these other alternative approaches that can also, we're all working towards a healthier mind, a healthier body. So sleep does that, trauma treatment does that, mindfulness does that, spirituality does that. Heart rate variability will quantify how those efforts are helping you, grow, heal over time.
That's fantastic, because if you have a treatment plan with your therapist or your psychologist or your psychiatrist that is, holistic in its
Yes.
approach, then, I think it's very important that we have this holistic approach. HRV, what I love about it is that, it gives you the measurability. You can see your
Yep.
actual progress on a day-to-day basis. And I love how, you bring us back to the basics, Matt. 8 hours sleep at night. That
Yep.
we forget about that,
Yep.
right? Eating good food. How many times don't we just get up and go?
Right.
We might have our first bite of a nugget that we make our kids like at the end of the day. Uh, and so, it's so important to have those basics in place to help strengthen our system. That's all fantastic, Matt. So, because obviously, you work with individuals, you work with corporate groups, you work with organizations. For corporate executives who are listening to you, to our episode today, where can they sign up?
Right. So initially, and we'll give this link at the end too. I'll give a link where I've written a book for those corporate executives. I got tired of business people calling us up and saying, "Hey, mental health guy, this would work in the business world too." And I'm like, "I got an MBA. I know this." So to shut them up, I wrote a book specifically for the business world. So because again, if you think about what we're talking about here, and this is I don't know if we've relied on this, but I see severe burnout as a trauma response, right? Is your body
Yeah.
your stress from your job is overwhelming your ability to cope. Well, that's pretty much our definition of trauma, especially if it's going on for a long period of time. And I don't have to tell people in this time of COVID what burnout does to you, because most of us has experienced it in some ways. So we've also created a dashboard for folks. So if you're a therapist, you can check in and see how your patients are doing each and every day, how their heart rate variability is doing. As a corporate executive, and we handle corporations a little differently because we want to protect the employees' confidentiality and make sure we're keeping everybody safe with that. As I like to
Yeah,
say,
that's
if you punish
important.
anybody for their heart rate variability, we will fire you immediately. We do not want your money if you're going to punish people for this. So what we can do now with our app is, how's your team doing today? How's your organization doing today? How are you doing today, manager? And, as we look at, and there's plenty of business researches like just packed of folks that prefrontal cortex, emotionally regulated, cognitively engaged. In other words, people that are doing a good job regulating their stress response, AKA high heart rate variability, are going to perform better at their work. We sort of, at least here in the States, we like glorify the executives who get 2 hours of sleep a night. Right now, Elon Musk is in the news and he's like, I work 26 hours a day. Well, it might be why you're doing some dumb things right now, right? So we glorify that. But what we're doing is they're probably go to work and make a lot of mistakes. They're probably costing you money because you're destroying their nervous system, the parts of the brain they need to be problem solvers. So can really give, and what I love is you can start to look at population norms, because HRV has been normed per population, age, gender, etc. And so you can look at a team's average versus population norm. And really what you're looking at is how the organization, the manager, is doing keeping that team healthy and in a state to perform at their best. So in this time of burnout, we can now really quantify that. How well is your HR efforts, your wellness efforts? How well is your managers of different teams doing to keep people in a state that, one, is probably going to be, they're going to be sick less, they're going to be more motivated, and they're going to be cognitively and socially better at work with that. So, and then if you do an intervention, just like with therapy, if you do a wellness intervention, how is that impacting heart rate variability across different teams, et cetera? So in a time of burnout, I think I know heart rate variability, again, quantifies organizational team health, as well as we've talked about the individual's health as well. So it's opening a whole new opportunity. And then again, with the mindfulness, the biofeedback, hey, you got a stressful meeting. Why not optimize your nervous system by doing a mindfulness practice at RF frequency breathing rate? Do that for 5 minutes, log on to the call. You're in the best state to perform on that call. So that's what I love about this personally is, maybe doing 5 minutes before you're on this big podcast. So, you come on and hopefully you make somewhat sense explaining really complex stuff.
No, you're doing wonderful. And I mean, I can so identify with this because you're right. Even if you take that 5 minutes and take that breathing practice, it really makes a difference, especially if you are consistent with the practice over a period of time. You do see an improvement in your wellness. And if you couple that with other interventions, it really, really works. And I'm excited about this app, and I'm really, really excited about your book. So your book is called Heart Rate Variability, The Future of Trauma-Informed Care.
Yes.
Where can the listeners find the book?
So if you go to, it's our nonprofit, Optimal Innovation Group, and I know these will be in the show notes, optimalinnovationgroup.org.
Yes.
You will see there's a little button up there that says free book offer. You can download it for free. You can find it on Audible, Amazon if you want the print copy as well. But hey, we're just giving it away right now, as well as the Heartbeat of Business book too. That's sort of a limited time offer, so you can download both of those in PDF forms, and it really goes through a deeper dive into the science behind this, how it really connects with brain function and trauma. And so really looking at that and really outlining both for the individual who is impacted by trauma and also the people helping them heal, just really how to use this science to, facilitate the post-traumatic growth process. So there was, I always like to write books. I joke is, I get interested in a topic. I go on Amazon. I see, anybody write a book on this? And if the answer is no, all I have to do is write a book better than nothing, and I think I've gotten pretty good at that. Yeah. I've sold almost 100,000 copies of my books over the years. And it's like, there wasn't a trauma-informed in my book. So I wrote one. So, it's great to wake up every morning and get interested in something and then, realize that, hey, I'm kind of an expert on this. So wanted to get that out there in the trauma world so we can start thinking about this. It's still probably 5. It's the innovative people right now that really think this way. So I've had a lot of great conversations with really innovative therapists. I really think, honestly, 5 to 10 years from now, I think this will be an integrated part of treatment. We need to measure this. And again, the mindfulness, biofeedback aspects, as I like to say, it's the greatest homework I can give a client as a therapist is, hey, I'm going to help you heal the nervous system. and you're going to help heal you're going to do these practices. Like you said, you put it really well. A 5-minute practice before a podcast is like stretching before a run. My 20 minutes a day, actually I do 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the afternoon, but really 20 minutes a day, that's like training for the marathon, right? It's not just like the little stretch to perform in the short term. We're really changing how our nervous system operates. And for anybody that's practiced mindfulness probably for over 6 months knows you start to become a different person, and a person your wife likes a lot better, a person your kids like a lot better, a person you probably like a lot better. But when you dedicate that time to a practice.
Thank you so much for the books that you are making available for the listeners to download for this limited time. And I wanted to say the app is available in the App Store as well as on Google and Android.
Yep, Apple, Android. Yep.
Okay.
Yep, you can get there. And if you're a clinician, I know my email will be out there. Please email us. We'd love to talk to you if it makes sense to bring this into your practice. Love to have that conversation to help you successfully implement this too.
And I agree. I think that this should become part of our integrated approach to healing trauma. And I think something else that's important is that we destigmatize trauma, because we've spoken about the workplace, we've spoken about how burnout in the workplace, we've spoken about divorce, we've spoken about somebody that broke their leg. But I think that, people still associate trauma with war veterans, rape survivors, survivors of dreaded disease, and war zones. So I think that we also need to destigmatize that, to say that the experience of whatever the event is and how it impacts you is really the trauma, because it's the experience that is traumatic. And I think that's an important point that we must bring across to the listeners. And that's how this will work very well in any environment, because if we view trauma in a different light, then this becomes applicable to us. And it's not this big scary thing, this big scary word that doesn't apply to me because I don't have any trauma.
Right. And the work you're doing is so important to that, and that's where, like, being sort of, I may not be the old man in the trauma movement. I'm kind of the second generation. I'll give the Vanderkolts, the Bruce Perrys, the Judith Hermans, all the credit for the Sandra Blooms, all my heroes that are, kind of got this started. But folks like yourself really spreading the word about this, and realizing that, trauma is a very individualized experience. Just what traumatizes me may not traumatize you, but it doesn't mean it's not devastating to me. We just may have had different life experiences, and vice versa with this.
Yes.
And so, and especially as we look at children who are incredibly vulnerable because their nervous systems are rapidly developing, and the parts of the prefrontal cortex doesn't really start the rapid development stage until late teenage years. So they're they're highly vulnerable to this as well. And so we probably have, especially coming out of a time of COVID, we've had the biggest civil rights movement in my lifetime coming out of the Black Lives Matter movement. Our political environment here in the States is, breaking families up of its own is, as I say, if you tell me the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years for you have been traumatic, I'm not going to question that, because, it's been that overwhelming stress for a lot of us. And that's why I'm kind of looking at 2023 as a year of recovery and resiliency. Some people are doing okay. So how do we build resiliency? Other people, and I'll be honest, I'm kind of on the borderline here. We've just been carrying around too much stress. Like there's this idea of chronic trauma, which isn't like the traumatic event that happens, right? That's what we often think about: the car wreck, the abuse, the assault, the war experience. But there's this other type of trauma, which is just as devastating as living under this high level of stress, whether that's job stress, whether that's burnout, whether that's living in poverty, whatever that might be, called chronic trauma, that can really wreck the nervous system in a very similar way as that traumatic event, which we'll often pay more attention to. So, we've all been through so much. So I challenge all your listeners is, hey, if you're doing great, write a book. Tell us how you did it. If you're like the rest of us, really looking at how do you take the next year to recover your best self, because it's not going to probably be a long weekend that most of us can do it. It's going to be month after month. That mindfulness practice we talked about. Hey, great New Year's resolution. Start out maybe with 5 minutes a day. February, maybe 10 minutes a day. Work your way up to 20 minutes a day. Like those kind of realistic goals. Taking walks. I don't even say exercise anymore because walking is, neuroscientists love walking. So can you get, and I know the weather over here in the States is terrible right now, but can you get outside and get a mile in a day and just doing little things like that, and giving yourself 12 months to get your mojo back, so to speak. And don't hesitate to reach out for your own mental health therapy as well. I know it's always part of my recovery plan is, I have a therapy appointment next Tuesday. Yeah. The trauma guy, the HRV guy. Yep. It's part of my plan as well, because I've been under the stress everybody has. So it's going to be part of my recovery plan too.
And you touched on it earlier in our conversation that, we need healthy people to assist in the trauma interventions, right? And so it's important for the ones who help also to take care of themselves. This has been such an illuminating discussion.
We've got to.
Thank you so much for breaking this down for us and making it palatable, because these are huge concepts. But thank you so much for making it, understandable for me and for my listeners. Matt, it's been awesome having you on the show.
And thank you for the work that you do. I've become a fan of your podcast, preparing for this episode. And again, it's folks like you getting the word out, connecting with communities. Really what I see you doing is spreading hope. And the fact I get to be a little part of the great message that you get out through the podcast and your work and your book is a great honor. So thank you for bringing my voice and my work to your audience.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And also to my listeners, I want you also to check out Matt's podcasts for more information. And that is Heart Rate Variability Podcast and Trauma Informed Lens Podcast. But I'll also link those for you in the description box in the show notes below this episode. Matt, it's been awesome. Take care.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
That wraps up this podcast episode. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy my podcast, please take a minute to give me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. Please subscribe in your favorite podcast directory so you don't miss an episode. Please consider following My Centered Life on Facebook and Instagram for daily inspiration. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. You can catch me again in the next episode. Same time, same place. Sending you lots of love and light. Bye.